The rain had been falling on Millbrook Crossroads since noon, the kind of thin autumn rain that did not so much fall as hang, and by dusk the yard of the Thorn and Kettle smelled of wet wool, tallow smoke, and the sour tang of spilled ale worked into old floorboards. A coach lamp swung somewhere past the gate. A dog barked twice and gave it up. She was the kind of woman an inn forgot the moment she left the room. Not pretty enough to be remembered for it, not plain enough to be pitied for it, only quick, only quiet, only there, and then not there. Nell Bramwell was 24 and had buried her mother the spring before last, and what her mother had left her was not money. It was a nose. Her mother had nursed 6 years in a physician's house before the Bramwells came down in the world, and she had taught Nell to know a thing by its smell, the way other women knew a thing by its price. Spoiled milk. Foxglove steeped too long in a posset meant for weak hearts. The bitter almond edge under a sweetened cup that meant somebody wanted a man to sleep hard and wake robbed. It was not a trade anyone paid for. It was only what she knew, the way some women knew lace or some men knew horses. She used it now to keep the still room at the Thorn and Kettle, testing the milk before it went up, smelling the tea before it went out, for 4 shillings a week and her bed in the loft. Tonight the coach from the north was due, and with it, though nobody at Millbrook Crossroads knew it yet, more trouble than the inn had seen in a year. If you like stories where kindness is tested before it is ever rewarded, and where the truth of a person comes out only when nobody important is watching, you may as well settle in for this one. Subscribe to the channel before we go further, and let's see what the coach brought. The boy was already outside in it, in the rain, mucking the stable with a lantern that gave more smoke than light. Tam was 9, or near enough. Nobody had ever troubled to write it down. He had come to the inn 2 winters back, with no father anyone could name, and a mother who had died of the coughing sickness in the poorhouse at Selby, and Mrs. Higgins, who ran the Thorn and Kettle with her husband's money and her own temper, kept him on because a boy who mucked stalls for his bed was cheaper than a man who mucked them for wages. Nell found him behind the stable wall with his lips split and starting to swell, and did not ask him who had done it, because she already knew. The eldest stable hand, a heavy young man named Purdy, thought a boy who could not fight back was a fair target for his boredom, and Mrs. Higgins would not hear a word against him, because he was strong and cheap, and did the work of 2. She did not scold Tam for crying. She only knelt in the mud in her one good skirt, which she could not replace, and looked at his mouth in the lantern light. "It will want cleaning," she said. "Hold still." She had brought a rag and a twist of salt water, because she had known, without being told, what she would find behind that wall. She had also brought half her own supper, wrapped in a cloth, because Mrs. Higgins fed the boy only what was left after the dogs, and some nights that was nothing at all. "Eat it now," she told him, "before anyone comes." He ate it too fast, the way hungry children always did, and she watched him and said nothing about her own empty stomach, because there was nothing to say that would not sound like asking for thanks, and she did not want his thanks. She wanted him fed. That was the whole of it. "I would have done it for any boy," she told him, when he tried, around the bread, to tell her she was good. It was not kindness in her own accounting. It was only what a person did. What she did not know, kneeling there in the mud with the rain running off the stable eave onto her neck, was that a man had come around the side of the building not 5 minutes before, meaning only to see to his own horse, and had stopped in the shadow of the wall instead, and had not moved since. He was travel-worn and plainly dressed, a caped coat gone dark with rain, boots that had seen better roads, and nothing about him to mark him as anything but a gentleman of modest means putting up for the night. He had given his name to Mrs. Higgins at the door as Mr. Ashworth, and it was true as far as it went, for Ashworth was his family's name before it was anything grander, and he had taken to using it on the road for exactly this reason. A man could learn a great deal about a place if the place did not know who he was. He had not meant to learn it here, in the mud, behind a stable wall. From a maid he had not yet exchanged 2 words with. He watched her wipe a stable boy's split lip with a rag she could not spare and give away food she plainly needed herself, and ask for nothing, not even a name in return, and something in his chest that had been shut for the better part of 2 years came open by perhaps an inch. She did not know, kneeling there, that the man who watched her from the shadow of the wall was Gideon Ashworth, Duke of Rowan, come home to lands he had inherited 8 months before, and had not yet set eyes on, travelling under his own plain surname because his father had told him once, long before either of them had thought the title would fall to a second son, that a man never knew the true worth of anyone, tenant or steward or bride, until he had watched them when they believed a duke was nowhere near. She straightened, wiped her hands on her skirt, and went back in through the kitchen door, without once looking toward the wall where he stood. He stayed in the rain a moment longer than he needed to. Mrs. Higgins found the split lip an hour later, and did not ask how it had been tended. She only looked at Nell with the flat suspicion of a woman who trusted nobody's generosity, least of all a girl with nothing to be generous from, and said the boy was clumsy and always had been, and that Nell had better mind her own work and not go wasting good bread on a stable brat who earned his keep or didn't. Nell did not argue. She had learned long ago that arguing with Mrs. Higgins cost more than it purchased. She only said she would mind her work, and went to see to the guest rooms, and did not think again of the bread, because in her accounting it had already been spent and forgotten, the way a debt is forgotten once it is paid. The gentleman who called himself Mr. Ashworth took supper in the small parlour rather than the common room, which Mrs. Higgins found odd in a man dressed so plain, and remarked on to her husband, who did not care. He asked, when Nell brought his plate, whether it was she who kept the still room, and when she said it was, he asked nothing further, only watched her set the dishes with a steadiness in his eyes that she found, without quite knowing why, harder to bear than Mrs. Higgins's suspicion. She did not curtsy to him. She had never seen the use of it for a man who paid the same 4 shillings worth of trouble as any other guest, and something crossed his face when she did not. Something that was almost surprise, and almost, though she could not have named it, relief. Before she left the room he asked her name. Bramwell, she said. Nell Bramwell. He did not offer his in return beyond what he had already given at the door, and she did not think to wonder at that, because why would a girl who emptied slop pails and tested milk for souring ever think a plainly dressed traveller had anything to hide? Later that night, after the house had gone quiet, and the rain had thinned to a drizzle that ticked on the stable roof, he left a coin on the sill of the tack room where the boy slept, folded into a scrap of paper that said only for the child's keep, and asked in the morning that nobody trouble to find out who had left it. Mrs. Higgins found the coin, and pocketed half of it before it ever reached Tam, which was a thing neither the Duke nor Nell would learn for some months yet, and which would matter a great deal when it finally came to light. But that was still ahead of them both. What mattered that first night was smaller and stranger. A man had stood in the rain and watched a woman give away her own supper to a boy who could never repay her, and had gone up to his cold room afterward and lain a long while looking at the ceiling, thinking that in 8 months of inheriting a dukedom he had met a great many people eager to be seen doing good, and not one, until tonight, who had done it believing herself entirely unseen. He did not know yet what he meant to do about it. He knew only that he intended to stay another day. Nell rose before light the next morning, as she always did, and found the kitchen already smoking from a fire Mrs. Higgins had lit to boil water for the North coach's passengers, who were expected by mid-morning. She did not think of the guest in the small parlour at all, except to note, when she carried up his shaving water, that he thanked her for it plainly, the way a man thanks another man, without the small performance of gratitude gentry sometimes made towards servants to prove their own goodness to themselves. She did not know what to make of that either. She only knew it sat easier with her than the alternative. By mid-morning the coach had come and gone, spilling its usual cargo of merchants, and one thin curate and a stout woman travelling to see a married daughter, and the inn had settled back into its ordinary rhythm of mud and smoke and Mrs. Higgins's temper. Nell went about the still room testing milk, gone half sour in the heat of the kitchen fire, discarding what would not do, and did not think of the man in the small parlour until Mrs. Higgins herself sent her up with his tea. It was an ordinary enough errand. She had carried up 100 trays in 4 years at the Thorn and Kettle, and thought nothing of the 101st until she was 2 steps from the door and caught, under the steam of the cup, a thread of something that did not belong there. She stopped in the corridor and set the tray down on the little table by the window, because her mother had taught her long ago never to carry a thing in her hands while she worked out what her nose was telling her, and bent over the cup, and went very still. It was faint. It would have been faint to anyone, and to most noses it would have been nothing at all. Lost under the tannin and the sugar Mrs. Higgins was overly generous with for guests who paid well. But under the sweetness there was a bitterness that did not belong to tea. Sharp and a little sweetish itself, the smell her mother had once made her memorize over a physician's kitchen table by holding a dropper of the stuff under her nose and saying, "Remember this, because one day it may save a life, and it will not be your own. Valerian, and something stronger under it. Enough, if a man drank the whole cup, to put him into a sleep from which he would not easily be roused before morning." She thought first of Mrs. Higgins, and dismissed it, because Mrs. Higgins would never risk her own trade for a guest's purse. She thought next of the coach passengers, gone an hour already, and dismissed that too. Then she thought of Silas Crick, the ostler who had come to the inn only that season, who kept his own hours in the stable yard, and had twice been seen going through a travelling gentleman's saddlebags on the pretence of checking the girth, and had twice talked his way out of it with a story about a loose buckle. She did not stop to be certain. She picked the tray back up, and went in without knocking, which she had never once done in 4 years, and found the gentleman with the cup already lifted half-way to his mouth. "Check your tea, sir," she said. "Do not drink it." He set the cup down. He did not ask her why, not at first. He only looked at her the way a man looks at something he has been waiting for without knowing it, and for a moment, one long strange moment, he did not move at all. "Why not?" he said when he found his voice again. "It has been doctored," she told him. "Valerian, or something near it. Enough to lay a grown man down for a night and a day. I have smelled it before." He looked at the cup, and then at her, and something in his face that had been carefully arranged since the moment she walked in came briefly, entirely undone. "You are certain," he said. "I am," she said. "I would not have said it otherwise." He asked her then, quietly, whether such a thing happened often at the Thorn and Kettle, and she told him, as plainly as she had told him everything else, that she suspected the ostler, that she had suspected him before, that 2 travellers in the past month had woken groggy and light in the purse and blamed the ale, and that she had never had proof enough to say so aloud until this moment, holding a tray that trembled only slightly in her hands. He asked her why she had troubled to check a stranger's tea at all, when it was no part of her work and no business of hers if a careless traveller lost his purse to a dishonest ostler. She looked at him as if the question itself were strange to her. "Because you were going to drink it," she said. That was reason enough. He did not thank her the way a gentleman thanks a servant for a service rendered, with a coin pressed too quickly into a hand that had not asked for one. He only asked her to sit, which she would not do, being a maid in a guest's private parlour, with work still to finish, and then asked her, carefully, as if the question cost him something, what her mother had done, that she had learned so much of poisons and posset cups. She told him, in the plain, unhurried way she told everything, and he listened the whole while without once interrupting her, and when she had finished, he said only that it was a rare thing, a woman who noticed what others were paid a great deal not to notice, and did it for nothing at all. "I did not do it for anything," she said. "I would have done it for anyone. I believe you," he said. "That is rather the trouble." She did not understand him, and did not ask him to explain, and left the tray untouched on the table, and went back downstairs to tell Mrs. Higgins, in the flattest voice she could manage, that Silas Crick had best be gone from the yard by nightfall, and why. Mrs. Higgins did not believe her at first, and might not have believed her at all, had the gentleman in the small parlour not come down himself an hour later and said, in a voice that carried more quiet authority than his plain coat suggested he owned, that he had reason to think the girl correct, and that he would take it very ill if Silas Crick were still employed at the Thorn and Kettle by. Morning. Mrs. Higgins, who had never in 4 years taken Nell's word for anything, dismissed Silas Crick before the sun went down, and told everyone in the yard it had been her own idea all along. Nell did not correct her. She had not done it to be believed. She had done it because a man was about to drink something that would have hurt him, and she happened to be the one standing in the corridor with a nose for it. What she did not see, because it happened after she had gone down to the kitchen and did not come up again that evening, was the letter the gentleman wrote at the small parlour table, addressed not to anyone at the inn, but to a man named Whitlock, his steward at Rowan, instructing him to look quietly into the character and circumstances of one Nell Bramwell of Millbrook, her age, her situation, whether she had family living, and to do it, the letter specified twice, without her ever learning that anyone had asked. He signed it not Ashworth, but Rowan, the name he had been trying, for 2 days to set aside entirely, and sealed it, and sat a long while afterward with the ruined cup of tea in front of him, thinking that he had come north to see his own lands as an ordinary man might see them, and had found in a coaching inn kitchen the first honest thing he had encountered since his brother died. He stayed a 2nd day at the Thorn and Kettle, and then a 3rd, longer than any business of his required, and told himself it was the roads, which the rain had made poor, and not the still room, where a woman with a chipped tin spoon tested milk each morning, and never once asked him a single question about who he was or what he wanted. because it had simply never occurred to her that a man in a plain coat might be worth asking. On the third morning he found her in the yard with Tam, showing the boy how to press a bruised knuckle with a cold cloth rather than let it swell, and stood at a little distance and watched, the way he had watched the first night, only this time he did not trouble to hide himself in shadow. She saw him, and did not startle. She only nodded, the way she nodded at anyone, and went on with the boy's hand. "Good morning, Mr. Ashworth," she said. "Good morning, Miss Bramwell," he answered, and something about hearing his borrowed name in her plain, unhurried voice settled in him like a stone dropped into still water, sending rings out further than he expected. He asked, before he left the yard, whether the boy was hers. "He is nobody's," she said. Which is the whole trouble with him. He did not answer that at once. He only looked at Tam's split lip, healing now, and at Nell's chapped red hands, and thought of the letter already on its way to Whitlock, and of what he meant to do, quietly, about a boy who was nobody's, and a girl who noticed poisoned tea because it happened to be in front of her, and never once thought to wonder what it might be worth to be thanked for it. He left 2 days later, without telling her his true name, without telling her anything at all beyond a plain thank you and a plain a good day, and rode north toward Rowan with the rain finally clearing behind him, carrying in his coat pocket a small folded paper on which he had written, for no purpose he could yet explain even to himself, the words Nell Bramwell, Millbrook, and nothing more. She did not know then that within the month a letter would come to the Thorn, and Kettle addressed to her by name, offering a position in the still-room and stores at Rowan itself, at wages 3 times what Mrs. Higgins paid, with lodging found for a boy of good character to come as under stable hand, no explanation given for the offer beyond a line that said her competence had been noted and was wanted. She did not know that the hand which had signed it was the same hand that had once, in a small parlour, 2 nights running, set down a cup of poisoned tea, because a plain-spoken maid had told him to. She knew only that Millbrook felt smaller after he had gone, in a way she could not account for, and did not try to, and that when the letter came, she read it twice before she believed it was meant for her at all. Rowan, when the carriage that fetched her finally rounded the last bend of the drive, was larger than anything Nell had pictured. Grey stone gone gold where the late autumn sun struck it, smoke rising thin and steady from a dozen chimneys, and a smell on the wind of cut wood and wet stone, and, underneath it, faintly wood smoke and horse. The same triad of smells that had followed her all her life, only grander now, and she held Tam's hand tight in the carriage and told him, in a voice steadier than she felt, that they would mind their manners and their work and nothing more, and nobody would trouble them. She was wrong within the hour, though not in the way she feared. The housekeeper who met them at the servants' door was a broad, quick-eyed woman named Mrs. Pruitt, who looked Nell over once, head to foot, the way a woman appraises cloth before she buys it, and pronounced her satisfactory before Nell had said a single word. "You'll do," Mrs. Pruitt said. "His Grace does not often trouble himself over a hiring. When he does, I've learned to trust his eye." "His Grace," Nell repeated. Mrs. Pruitt looked at her a long moment, and something in her broad face softened, the way it did for people she had already decided to like. "You didn't know," she said. "It wasn't in the letter, was it?" "No, he wouldn't have put it in." Nell's hand tightened on Tam's shoulder. "Who is he, then?" she asked, though some part of her had already begun to understand, turning over the plain coat and the borrowed name, and the letter to a man called Whitlock she had never known existed, and arriving, slowly, at an answer she did not want. "Gideon Ashworth, Mrs.," Pruitt said, "Duke of Rowan these 8 months past, since his brother took the fever and did not mend. Ashworth is his own name. Mind, it isn't a lie exactly. He's only fonder of using the plain half of it than the grand half, and I dare say he had his reasons for not correcting you at the Thorn and Kettle." Nell said nothing for a long moment. She thought of the small parlour, of the cup she had told a stranger not to drink, of the plain thank you he had given her, as though her warning had cost him nothing to accept and everything to deserve. She thought of curtsying to no one, of calling a duke Mr. Ashworth to his face for 3 days running, and felt something in her chest go tight and small, not quite anger, not quite shame, something closer to the cold feeling of having given a gift, and learned afterward it had been received under false colours. "I would have done the same for any man," she said finally to Mrs. Pruitt, or perhaps only to herself. "It should not signify who he was." "It does not signify to him either," Mrs. Pruitt said, not unkindly. "That is rather why he did not tell you." Nell was given a room off the still room, small and clean, with a window that looked out on the kitchen garden, and Tam was given a cot in the stable loft under the head groom. A quiet, steady man named Otway, who did not raise his hand to boys, and would not have tolerated a Purdy in his yard for a single day. For the first fortnight she saw the Duke of Rowan only twice, once crossing the stable yard in riding clothes with Otway at his elbow, once at a distance in the long gallery, when she carried linens through, and both times he inclined his head to her exactly as he had at the Thorn and Kettle, no more, no less, as though nothing between them had changed at all, which only unsettled her further, because everything had. She worked hard and said little, and told herself she had come to Rowan for the wages, and for Tam's sake, and for nothing else, and mostly believed it. It was in the 3rd week that she began to hear the small stories, the way servants' stories travel through a great house faster than any letter, carried in the scullery and repeated over mending. That the tenant at Adder's Cross had had his roof mended after a storm and never been billed for it. That a widow in the village had found a doctor at her door for her lying in, paid in full, with instructions the physician was not to name who had sent him. That old Fen, the blind fiddler who played at the crossroads for coppers, had a new coat every winter and swore he did not know where it came from, only that a boy left it folded on his step. Always the money came, without a name attached. Always whoever asked was told the same thing, that the giver wished it kept quiet, that thanks were neither wanted nor to be delivered. Nell listened to these stories the way she listened to most gossip, half attending, until Mrs. Pruitt, folding linen beside her one grey afternoon, said without looking up that his Grace had done the same for years, long before the title fell to him, when he was only the 2nd son with a modest income and no expectation of Rowan at all, and that his brother had once teased him for it, calling him a man who could not walk past a hardship without emptying his pockets into it, and that Gideon had only said that a man ought to do what good he could where nobody was keeping the ledger, because the ledger God kept was the only one that mattered. Nell set down the linen in her lap. "Why does he hide it?" she asked. Mrs. Pruitt considered the question a long moment before she answered. "There was a young woman once," she said, "before his brother died, before any of this. Lady Araminta Vane, his cousin twice removed on his mother's side, and betrothed to him a full year before it came to nothing. Pretty as a picture, and wept beautifully whenever it served her, and I saw with my own eyes the day she boxed a housemaid's ears for spilling water on her hem, and then wept in front of his Grace not 5 minutes later, so prettily he nearly forgave her for it on the spot. He did not, in the end. But I think it taught him something about the difference between a person who is good where it is seen, and a person who is only good. Nell thought of the tea, of the boy behind the stable wall, of a plain coat in the rain, and said nothing at all, though something in her chest, which had gone tight and cold 3 weeks before, began very slowly to loosen. She did not know, folding linen in the grey afternoon light, that the Duke of Rowan was at that same hour in his study reading Whitlock's second report on her, which said only that Nell Bramwell had no family living, had cared for her mother through a long illness without complaint, had never once in 4 years at the Thorn and Kettle been accused by anyone of dishonesty or unkindness, and had, according to 2 separate accounts, given away more of her own wages to feed a stable boy than any servant in the district thought sensible. He read it twice, and set it down, and thought that he had built, without quite meaning to, a very careful test, and that she had passed every part of it without once knowing she was being examined. He did not yet know how he meant to tell her so. The frost came early that year, and with it Cordelia Vane, Dowager Lady Marsh, who was Gideon's father's sister's daughter, and had made no secret since his brother's death of her opinion that the dukedom would have sat better on her own son's shoulders than on a man who had spent half his life playing at being ordinary. She arrived at Rowan unannounced, as was her custom, with 2 carriages, a maid, a lapdog, and a laugh like a small bell struck 3 times, always the same 3 beats, that she used to punctuate any remark she considered clever. She found Nell in the still-room on her second morning, testing a jar of preserved plums gone slightly over, and looked her up and down the way Mrs. Pruitt had, except that where Mrs. Pruitt's look had ended in approval, Lady Marsh's ended in a small, satisfied curl of the mouth. "You are the girl from the coaching inn," she said. "I have heard of you, the one who smells things." Nell straightened, wiped her hands, and said that she kept the still room, yes, my lady. "How resourceful," Lady Marsh said. "I imagine a nose is a great deal more use to a girl of your sort than a face would be. Bell, 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 tell me, do you often go about warning gentlemen off their tea? Or was that a particular effort, made for a particular gentleman?" Nell did not answer at once. She had learned long before Rowan that some remarks were traps built to be walked into, and that silence, held long enough, disarmed them better than any reply. "I would have warned any man," she said finally. "It was not particular to anyone." "How very democratic of you," Lady Marsh said. "I confess I find it difficult to credit that a girl with hands like yours acted from nothing but goodness. Red knuckles do so love to be noticed, don't they, and rewarded, and married up out of the scullery into a house like this one." Nell looked down at her own hands, chapped from lye and cold water, and did not hide them, and did not answer that either. Because there was no answer that would not sound like defending herself against an accusation that had never been fair to begin with. "That will do, Cordelia," said a voice from the doorway, quiet and entirely without heat, which was somehow worse for Lady Marsh than shouting would have been. Gideon stood there in riding clothes, hat still in hand, and something in his stillness made even the lapdog under Lady Marsh's arm go quiet. "She did not ask for your opinion of her hands," he said, "nor did she ask for mine. I would take it as a kindness if you did not offer either again while you are a guest in this house." Lady Marsh's bell laugh came once, thin this time, without its usual 3 beats. "I meant no harm, Gideon. I only wondered aloud." "Then wonder elsewhere," he said, and turned to Nell, and something in his face, brief and unpractised, was almost an apology. though he did not speak one aloud, because he judged correctly that an apology spoken in front of Lady Marsh would only give the moment more weight than Nell wanted it to carry. Nell finished the plums in silence after they had both gone, and did not cry, because she had trained herself long ago not to cry where it showed, and told herself that Lady Marsh's opinion of her hands was worth exactly as much as Lady Marsh's opinion of anything, which was to say nothing at all. But that night, alone in her small room off the still room, she allowed herself, for the length of one candle burning down, to wonder what it would cost her to stay in a house where women like that considered her a joke to be made at dinner, and a duke's kindness a debt she had not asked to owe. She did not answer that question that night. She only blew out the candle and lay a long while listening to the frost tick against the window glass. The withdrawal, when it came quietly, the way most of Nell's decisions came. She did not make a scene of it. She did not ask to be released from her position or demand to be sent back to Millbrook in disgrace. She only began, over the following fortnight, to arrange matters, so that she was rarely where the Duke of Rowan was likely to be, taking her meals early, keeping to the still room, sending Tam's reports of the stable up through Otway rather than carrying them herself, until it would have taken a deliberate effort on Gideon's part to cross her path at all, and for a time busy with a hard frost and an audit of tenant accounts that troubled him more than he let on. He did not make that effort, and the distance between them widened without either of them quite choosing it. It was in this same fortnight that the audit turned up what it turned up. Gideon had asked Whitlock, soon after arriving at Rowan for good, to go through the household books his brother's steward had kept, out of nothing more than a new duke's ordinary caution, and what came to light, slowly, page by careful page, was that a sum of money set aside each quarter for the relief of tenants in hardship, a fund his father had established, and his brother had continued without much attention, had for the better part of 2 years been recorded as paid out, and had not, in fact, reached the cottages it was meant for. Mrs. Higgins's coin, pocketed half from a folded paper meant for a stable boy, was a small thing beside it, but it was cut from the same cloth. And when Gideon finally traced the missing sums to their end, he found they had gone, by a route of small dishonesties and larger silences, into accounts that touched, at one remove, Lady Marsh's own household in Bath. He said nothing of it to her directly, not yet. He only grew quieter and colder toward her at table, and Lady Marsh, sensing the ground shifting beneath her without quite knowing why, grew sharper in return, which was how on a bitter evening 2 days before Christmas she came to say in the hearing of the whole downstairs hall, loudly enough that Nell heard it from the still room doorway, that she supposed Gideon meant to marry his stable stores after all. Since he seemed unable to find a woman of proper blood who would have him, grief struck and strange as he had become, and that it was no wonder, considering how coldly he had used his own family since the title came to him. Nell did not go to comfort him. She did not think it was hers to do. She only heard, an hour later, second-hand from a scullery girl, breathless with the telling, that his Grace had told Lady Marsh in front of the whole hall that she would leave Rowan within the week, and that her allowance from the estate, which she had drawn without much scrutiny for a decade, would be reviewed by his solicitor before another farthing of it was paid. That night, in her small room, Nell wrote a short letter, not to Gideon, whom she did not think would welcome one from her, but to Mrs. Pruitt, saying she thought it best, matters at the house being what they were, that she and Tam returned to Millbrook after the New Year, before her presence became any further cause for talk. She did not send it. She meant to, in the morning. But in the morning Mrs. Pruitt came to her first, before she had so much as folded the letter into its cover, and sat her down at the kitchen table with a cup of tea neither of them touched, and told her plainly the story that would change everything. "It was you, Mrs. Pruitt said, without preamble, in that gruff way she had of arriving at the heart of a thing before either party was quite ready for it. All of it. Adder's Cross, the widow's doctor, old Fenn's coat, the boy who used to bring the coin to your tam at the Thorn and Kettle before Higgins skimmed half of it for herself. It was all him, and it began, near as I can tell, the very week he left that inn." Nell set the cup down carefully. "I don't understand," she said. "He asked Whitlock to see the coin reach the boy properly this time, Mrs. Pruitt said, and to see the boy had a place here if he wanted one, and to do it all without your ever hearing his name attached to a farthing of it. He gave the same instruction he has always given, going back years, before the title, before any of this. Do not tell them who sent it. He said once to me that a gift with a name stapled to it stops being a gift and starts being a debt, and he would rather do good and be thought nothing of than be thanked for it, and feel he had bought the thanks." Nell sat very still. "Then the coin at the Thorn and Kettle," she said slowly, "the one Higgins pocketed half of. His, Mrs. Pruitt said, left the first night, before he ever knew your name, before he had any notion who you were beyond a maid kneeling in the mud over a boy's split lip. He watched you do that, child, from the stable wall, thinking himself unseen, and it is my belief, though he has never said so plainly to me, that it was the watching that undid him. Not the tea, not the warning, though I'll grant you that one made an impression too. The bread, the kneeling in the mud for a boy who could do nothing for you in return." Nell thought of the rain that first night, of Tam's swollen lip, of the bread she had given away without a second thought, and felt the tight cold thing in her chest, which had sat there since the day she learned his name, begin at last to come apart. Why does he never take credit, she asked. Why let Higgins claim it as her own idea, let a village think a coat simply appeared on a step? Because he watched what flattery did to a woman who wanted the title more than she wanted him, Mrs. Pruitt said, not unkindly. And he decided, I think, a long while ago, that the only good worth doing was the kind nobody could turn around and use against you afterward. You cannot flatter a man for a kindness he never claimed. You cannot marry him for a generosity he never let you see. Nell sat a long while with that, the untouched tea gone cold between her hands, and when she finally spoke it was not to Mrs. Pruitt at all, but half to herself. "Then I have been angry at him," she said, "for the very thing that ought to have told me who he was." Mrs. Pruitt only patted her hand, once, and said that grown people were often slow to forgive a lie, even a kind one, and that she thought Nell had better go and tell him so herself, sooner rather than later, because a man like that did not often say a thing twice. And she suspected he had been waiting 3 weeks already for a door that had not opened. The small parlour at Rowan, when Mrs. Pruitt led her to it that same evening, was nothing grand, a low room with a modest fire and 2 chairs drawn near it, chosen, Nell understood later, precisely because it was the least ducal room in the house, the sort of room a man might sit in and be only a man. Gideon was standing at the window when she came in, and turned, and for a moment neither of them spoke at all. The fire popping once in the grate to fill the silence, neither seemed ready to break. "I owe you a truth," he said finally, before she could speak first. "I have owed it to you since the Thorn and Kettle, and I put off paying it a great deal longer than I ought to have. Nell said nothing. She only waited, hands folded, the way she had waited so many times before for other people to finish saying difficult things. "My name is not the one I gave you," he said. "You know that now. What you may not know is why I gave you the false one to begin with. My father used to say that a man never learns the truth of anyone, tenant, steward, or bride, until he has watched them, believing no duke is anywhere near. I did not go to Millbrook meaning to test you. I went meaning to see my own lands honestly, for once before rank made every face in front of me polite and careful and false. I did not expect to find, behind a stable wall in the rain, a woman giving away her own bread to a boy who could never repay her, believing herself entirely alone. I would have done it whoever was watching, Nell said, or no one at all. I know, he said. That is precisely why it mattered. You did not know how to be anything but yourself. I have spent 8 months surrounded by people who know exactly how to be whatever they think I want, and I had forgotten, until that night, what it looked like when someone simply was not performing at all. He crossed the room, not quickly, and stopped a respectful distance from her, close enough to speak low. Far enough that she would never mistake it for pressure. I do not ask you to forgive the lie tonight, he said. I do not ask you to answer anything tonight. I would rather have your silence honestly kept than a yes given, because you feel a duke is owed one. I will ask you again in the spring, if you will let me, and your no will be exactly as safe with me then as it is now. Nell looked at him a long moment, the fire warm on one side of her face, and thought of every kindness given without a name attached, of a coin left for a stable boy before he knew hers, of Cordelia Marsh, sent from the house not for insulting a maid's hands, but for a decade of quiet dishonesty finally brought into the light, and thought, too, of the tea, and of the moment he had frozen over the cup, not from fear of poison but, she understood only now, from the shock of being warned by someone who wanted nothing at all in return. You are not the only one who owes a truth, she said. I was angry with you for hiding who you were. But I think, if I am honest, I was more afraid of what it would mean if you were exactly who you seemed. And I had already begun to care for a man I believed I could never have. Something in his face came undone again, briefer this time, and closer to a smile than she had ever seen from him. And do you still believe that, he asked, that you could never have him? I do not know yet what I believe, she said, but I no longer believe you lied to spare yourself anything. I believe you lied to find something true. That is a different matter entirely. He did not press her further that night. He only asked, when she rose to go, whether he might walk her as far as the still room door, and she let him, and at the door he took her hand, not to kiss it, only to hold it a moment in both of his, bare fingers against chapped red knuckles she had once been told, cruelly, were not fit to be noticed. I will wait for spring, he said again, and released her hand, and did not ask for anything more. Spring came to Rowan slower than either of them wanted, but it came. The frost broke in March, the orchard blossomed white along the south wall, and Nell found herself, more often than either of them planned aloud, in the small parlour with the low fire, or walking the kitchen garden with Gideon at a pace neither of them hurried, talking of small things, the plums gone over, Tam's progress under Otway, a tenant family whose roof had finally, properly been mended in daylight, and with a name attached to it this time, because Gideon had told Whitlock he no longer wished every kindness kept secret, only the ones that mattered most. It was in the garden, on an evening when the light ran long and gold across the new grass, that he finally asked her the question he had promised to ask, and asked it exactly as he had promised, without pressure, without ceremony, only the plain truth laid out between them the way she had once laid the truth of a poisoned cup between them at the Thorn and Kettle. "I love you," he said, "for the woman who knelt in the mud and asked for nothing, and for the woman who told me not to drink my own tea, and for no reason that has anything to do with rescue, or gratitude, or debt. I would have loved you exactly the same had I never had a title to offer, and I want you to know that before you answer, because I would rather you married the man than the dukedom." "I never wanted the dukedom," she said. "I am not certain I want it now. But I have wanted the man since a wet night in a stable yard, and I did not let myself say so until I understood he wanted nothing back for it either." "Then say it plainly," he said. "I find I have grown fond of plain speech. I will marry you," she said, "but I set 2 conditions, and I want them heard before you answer." "Name them," he said. "You are never to lie to me again, not even a kind lie, not even to spare me, and you are never to hide your goodness from me the way you hid it from the county. I do not need it announced to the world. I only ask that I at least be allowed to see it plainly, since I mean to spend my life beside it." He agreed to both, without a moment's pause, and drew off her glove then, finger by finger, slow and deliberate, as though it were a small ceremony he intended to remember, and pressed his mouth once to the bare back of her hand, and said that yes was the only word he needed from her, and that he had never in his life been so glad to hear so short a sentence. "Yes," she said again anyway, because she found she liked the sound of it. They were married in June, quietly, in the small stone chapel at Rowan, a wedding a duke's rank made grand only in the number of carriages that lined the drive, and not in anything either of them said aloud inside the chapel itself, which was plain and warm and smelled of new-cut hay brought in for the occasion, and old paper and beeswax, the same triad, near enough, that had followed Nell all her life, only sweeter now. Cordelia Marsh did not attend. She had gone to Bath the spring before, her allowance cut to a plain sufficiency and no more, and wrote once, that autumn, a letter full of old complaint and older excuses, which Gideon read once, said nothing of, and set unanswered in the fire. Mrs. Higgins kept the Thorn and Kettle a while longer, though custom fell away from it once word travelled that she had once skimmed a coin meant for an orphan boy, and within 2 years she sold the inn, and left Millbrook for good unmourned. Tam grew tall under Otway's steady hand, and by the time he was 15 had a place as under-steward promised him, in his own name, for his own work, which was, Gideon told him once, the only kind of place worth having. A year to the day after the wedding, Nell sat by the fire in the small parlour at Rowan, with Gideon's hand in hers, bare fingers laced with bare fingers, the same low fire, the same 2 chairs, the same modest room he had chosen once, because it let him be only a man. On the table beside them sat an old tin spoon, chipped and worn, the one her mother had taught her to smell tea and milk and trouble with, which she had never once put away, and which Gideon had mounted, without her asking, in a small silver stand, not to make it grand, he said, but so it would last as long as the story it belonged to. Outside a rook called once from the orchard wall, and went quiet. She did not let go of his hand, and he did not let go of hers, and neither of them thought it strange that a thing so small as a warning over a cup of tea had been, in the end, the whole beginning of everything they now held. Character, in the end, is only what a person does when they believe no one of consequence is watching, and it is a rare and quiet thing to be loved for it, instead of merely admired. That is where we leave Nell and Gideon, hand in hand by a fire that has never once gone cold between them, and it is worth sitting with the thought that the smallest act, a warning, a bit of bread, a moment of honesty nobody asked for, can turn out to be the truest thing about a person. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. And I would love to know, in the comments, what you think it was that truly won Gideon's heart that first rainy night, the warning over the tea, or the bread given away in the mud before he ever said a word. Tell me which moment you believe mattered most. Until the next story, stay close, and I will meet you there with another quiet kindness waiting to be seen.